loud. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're very excited. We have an amazing guest speaker tonight. I'm going to tease you a little bit and make you wait just a few moments. I've got a couple of announcements, so let me do a little housekeeping for you guys. The contest for Photo of the Month, you can go ahead and submit your photos for April. You can also vote for March. And congratulations to February winner, user ID, Michael Vincent. So, you know, we're able to figure out who you are. The next announcement is the bus tour this Saturday. We do have some seats available and it's free. It includes lunch, and we'll be touring to 4 different local area fish stores. So that's going to be super fun.
Do you need the RSVP to that?
You do need to sign up for that.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So signing up is on the website for them. Great question. Thank you. Yes. MACNA is April 2nd and 3rd. And you may be going, why in the world are you announcing Atlanta? And because perhaps most of us aren't going, but our very own Mark Levinson is going to be one of the speakers there. And Mark is currently our president. So yay, Mark, yay. The next announcement is our next club meeting. So we will figure out whatever happened to sound here because we're doing similar. We've got Aqua Studios and Brandon will be speaking on dinos. So save the date for April 21st. We have May 18th, CC is speaking. June 22nd is Algae Barn. Oh my gosh, I had a little arrow that said I need to speak about something in between the two, and that is the Bounce Back Part 2. We have an additional over $3,000 worth of prizes that we're going to be giving out. And so that means our cumulative total to help everyone. Those of you who were here early, we talked a little bit about some of the just awful things that happened with the Texas ice storm last year. And so now we have over $9,500 worth of things. And we're trying to get a little something into everyone's hands, right? Something that'll make you feel better, help you get water back in your aquarium, bring the passion back. So that's what Bounce Back is all about. And you don't need to do anything other than be a member. And so if you're a member, you're in the drawing, and good luck to you. And if you were notified for round 1, the February original Bounce Back, you do need to claim your prize, or that's going to roll into part 2. So we do have some, and there is, related to Bounce Back, a 45% off right now with AlgaeGen Direct. There's information up on the website, so that's tied to the Bounce Back promotion. So that's all the housekeeping I have, and I have been waiting since November for this, and the fact that tonight is even happening is like, I don't know, I feel like I'm meeting a rock star. So Jay, I'm so excited. I have a bio here that I'm going to read. But it's like having the fish god right here on our call. Jay Hemdal has kept aquarium fish since he was 4. He set up his first marine aquarium in 1968 when he was 9 years old. He later worked part-time for many years at various local retail pet stores and fish wholesale companies while he was living at home and then during college. After graduating from college with a degree in aquatic biology, he managed the aquarium department of a large retail pet store for 5 years until 1985, when he was hired as an aquarius diver and then later department manager for a large public aquarium. In 1989, he accepted the position of curator of fishes and invertebrates for another public aquarium, where he remains today as general curator. Congratulations. Jay has written over 200 articles and papers, as well as 7 books since 1981. And there's so much left out of here. I know Jay from Reef to Reef, and I am beyond excited to turn this over to him. So without further ado, Jay, you should be able to share your screen whenever you're ready. And I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'm going to go on mute.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I'm going to try to share my screen now. And let's see how this goes. Okay, if I could hear from somebody that you can see this.
Yep.
You're good.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to be talking about marine fish diseases, quarantine, and a little bit about sustainability. This is one of those topics where if you need to know it, you really need to know it. But if your fish are all healthy at the moment, not so interesting. So I hope that you can get some takeaways from this talk that can help you with your fish down the road. So as we all know, acquiring healthy fish is the best start to have. Obviously, if you buy a sick fish, you're behind the 8 ball and you're already losing the battle. So what is healthy and what is not so healthy? Well, I always tell people to try to acquire fish that have been in country for at least 2 weeks. Better yet, if you can buy fish that were pre-quarantined by the vendor in some way. They may not do a quarantine exactly right or the way you would do it, but that all adds time to the process. And I'll talk about this later. Newly imported fish have a real high mortality rate. And so if you can let that mortality occur on somebody else, you're just going to be more successful with your own fish. You also need to avoid areas where collections are less sustainable. And this includes the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, specifically because of cyanide collection, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Sustainability of marine fish is a lot higher for Florida, Japan, Red Sea, Australia, East Africa, and Fiji. Hawaii is crossed out because they're not sending fish out of there right now. And then finally, a lot of the fish that I get are shipped in to me. And so I don't get the ability to be able to inspect them. So I have to rely on the shipper to send me healthy fish. But if you can go to the pet store and see the fish, then you have the ability to look for these signs to avoid. Signs of parasitism in any fish in the same water system as the one you want to purchase from is a no-go. And this includes buying invertebrates. Last year, I was at a local live fish store and I needed to get some cleanup crew for my aquarium. And I went to their invertebrate system and I looked, and there's some shrimp and some snails and some hermit crabs. And I'm like, okay, I was counting in my head what I was going to get. And I happened to look in the sump of the system and there's a big tang just covered in egg. I don't know why it was down there. I don't know if the store was trying to cure it by putting it in an invertebrate system or something, but it made the entire system, as far as I was concerned, contaminated. So I didn't buy anything that day. Look for any cloudy appearance to the fish's skin or eyes. The eyes are kind of the window to the soul of fish. They're clear, so any haziness often shows up first on the eyes. Certainly major fin damage or missing scales could be a problem. And then you need to look at the respiration rate. And if the respiration rate is greater than 100 to 120 beats per minute, you might want to discount that fish and not acquire it. Now, how do you get that rate? You're not going to get a fish to hold still for a minute so you can count. Experienced aquarists can pretty much look at fish and know if they're breathing too fast or not. If you can get a count for 15 seconds and then multiply by 4. Look for any abnormal thinness in the belly or behind the eyes of the fish. Lethargy or hanging near the surface or even being excessively shy can be a warning sign. And then, as a wild animal vet once told me, watch out for something that's ADR. That stands for ain't doing right. And what that means is just if something doesn't look quite right to you, it could be an issue. There's lots of other fish in the sea. You don't have to necessarily buy the fish that's right there in front of you that day. If something doesn't feel right, maybe move on. And then finally, people will say this. I know it's a lot easier to say than to do. Ask to see the fish feed before you acquire it. Now, the problem is if you do that on a Saturday morning in a busy fish store, they can't feed that tank 100 times that day for every customer. I understand that. I used to manage a pet store, so I get that. They'll probably say, hey, it's eating fine. And all you need to do is just get some assurance that it's still going to eat when you get it home. That's all. But if you can see it eat, all the better. Sometimes, like with little clownfish, you don't even have to see it eat. You walk up to the tank and the clownfish comes to the front glass and wiggles at you. You know it's going to be a good feeder. You don't have to see it actually eat. So let's talk a little bit about the cyanide issue. This is ongoing. It's still happening. I first heard about it in 1969, I think, but it's been going on since the early 60s. happened was sodium cyanide was used in the Philippines as a palm tree fungicide, and they found that they could dissolve it in water and spray it on the reefs, and it would stun the fish, and then they could catch the fish and eat them for dinner. And that got applied to live coral reef fish for the aquarium trade. I've done 3 studies over the years. These were not scientific studies, but they were studies of major importations that I had an opportunity to judge the mortality rate on. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but if you look at the 3 different studies, you see that for the suspected cyanide collected fish, within the first 30 to 40 days of importation, 60, 55, and 56% of them died. And these were fish that I was caring for personally or was managing the people that cared for the fish. Also, there were control fish in the same aquarium systems at the same time, and they had much lower mortality rates, 9%, 3%, 6.2%. So people will say, oh, cyanide's not a problem. Well, if it's not cyanide, then it's something else is causing this ultra high mortality in Southeast Asian fishes, primarily from Indonesia and from the Philippines. It used to be Indonesia back in 1980 and 81 was actually one of the best sources for fish. I worked with a guy out of Detroit that was importing from Jakarta, and he called me up one day and he was just about in tears. He said that he was over in Indonesia talking to his supplier, and someone came up to him and said, oh, sir, we're going to be able to get you fish much cheaper. We're using magic now. And after that happened, the quality of the fish out of Jakarta just tanked. So it's still happening. It's suspected to be happening in Vietnam. So just to be aware that it's still out there and it does incur latent mortality. I'd like to talk a little bit about acclimation because I've seen it misapplied over the last, 10 years or so. Specifically in the case where if a little bit of acclimation is good, a much longer acclimation must be much better. And I've had situations where people were acclimating through drip acclimation for 10 hours, and that's just not appropriate. Remember, for marine fish, you can always drop the salinity much faster than you can raise it. And that becomes an issue when a lot of reef tanks are being run at full marine specific gravity, say 1.026, but a lot of retail systems for fish are being run at 1.019. You buy a fish in 1.9 and you bring it home and try to acclimate it to 2.6 in an hour, and you may run into problems. It's much better to match that specific gravity in your tank at home and then bring it up slowly over 4 or 5 days. And then I hear this all the time. People tend to overstate the need for careful acclimation, but then they don't quarantine their fish at all. And to me, acclimation is only part of the whole key. You got to look at quarantine as well. And then finally, I want to talk about the drip method. I don't have the numbers here in front of me because it was a paper I had done many years ago, but I actually did some experimentation with drip acclimation. And a lot of times you'll hear 1 drop per second as the rate you should set it for. And I did the run, and it looked like mathematically it was going to take 96 hours for 1 gallon or 1/2 gallon of seawater to equilibrate if you're getting just 1 drop per second of new water flowing in. So it really needs to be not drip acclimation, it needs to be flow acclimation. But here's the big kicker. When fish are shipped to you, especially overnight, as you know, the fish give off carbon dioxide that drops the pH in the bag. They also produce ammonia as their waste, and that's known. What some people miss or don't realize how important it is that at a low pH, ammonia is non-toxic to fish. At a high pH, it's deadly. What happens is, if you look at that picture with the fish in the bowl, with the aeration and water dripping in, if you were to put water in there from a shipping bag that has a pH of, say, 6.0 and an ammonia level of 2.0, that aeration is going to drive off the carbon dioxide. The pH is going to shoot up, and that 2 part per million ammonia will change to the form that's very toxic, and the fish can die right in that container, or they can die later on from ammonia burns. One method that might work for fish, especially for fish that have been shipped for like 36 to 48 hours, is when you get the fish, open the bag and you real quickly test for pH temperature, and salinity. Then you make up some seawater that has that same temperature, pH, and salinity. Use hydrochloric acid to drop the pH and match the salinity and temperature, and just move all the fish right over. And then acclimate them from that solution with no ammonia. So that's another thing to think about. So we know that fish undergo stress, but there's a lot of different types of stress. Subclinical stress, the fish will have no symptoms. Life itself has got some stressors to it. I'm stressed out right now talking to a group of people. So sometimes there's no real symptoms. Occasionally in aquariums, you'll run into chronic stress. This is a long-term problem with minor symptoms. Could be poor diet, could be high nitrate level in the water. Maybe it's a fish picking on another fish, not seriously, but enough that it causes problems long-term. Then there's acute stress. It's short-term, very severe symptoms, and that would be like active disease. And then finally, there's pure-acute stress, and that's immediate and lethal, like a fish that jumped out of a tank. You have to act right away to save it. And then I want to talk real briefly about a respiration rate study that I had done, because fish in the wild undergo huge amounts of stress as well. So since 1984, I've been measuring fish respiration rates when I can as a sort of a means to judge their healthiness. As we know, we talk about rapid breathing as being a symptom of disease or stress. And so I compiled this huge database, thousands of measurements of fish in captivity. And my thought was always, well, you know, fish in the wild are inherently healthy because sick fish get eaten by predators. So the fish that you see swimming on a reef are healthy. So I said to myself, well, I'm going to get wild fish respiration rates because that's going to be my baseline. Anything higher than wild fish is going to be abnormal and it's going to be a sign of a problem. So on collecting trips with the aquariums that I worked for and some research trips, I did collections in the Florida Keys, underwater respiration rates in the Florida Keys, the Bahamas, Belize, and 2 trips to some islands off of Ecuador. And I took all those measurements and I started to look at the data. Now, I'm not very good with statistics, but I can see right away that most of the fish in the wild were breathing faster than the fish in captivity, the healthy fish in captivity anyways. And I was kind of scratching my head as to why that's the case. Well, it's because wild fish are actively searching for food, avoiding predators, fighting strong currents. Whereas your captive fish, you know, your reef tank may have some currents for them to play in, but they're not like ocean currents or waves. And hopefully no predators in your reef tanks. And the fish are well fed, they don't have to look for food, and they just sort of hang out. And so they breathe slower. So wild fish not having any stress is not a true statement. They have a huge amount of stress going on. Now, you've probably seen this diagram before. It's used in a lot of biology textbooks. And it's on a lot of aquarium websites. I interpret this a little bit differently, and I've taken a lot of flack for this. But the main way that this particular Venn diagram is presented to people is where you see that the 3 circles intersect, the host, the pathogen, and the environmental issue intersect in the center there. They say that's where you will have active disease. If you have an environmental problem, the fish in the tank, and a parasite in the tank, the fish will get sick. Problem is there's more to it than that. As we talked about, stress is not always the only reason fish get sick. You can have perfectly healthy fish with no stress, but if they're exposed to a pathogen, they can still become sick in an aquarium. And that's because of propagules pressure. The number of pathogens in a small aquarium per host animal is so great that it overcomes the fish, even if your environment is as perfect as you can enable it to be. So what about the other intersections? So what about where it intersects with host and environmental issue, but no pathogens? Well, that's still a problem. You can have high ammonia, no diseases, and your fish can still die. So having host fish in a tank with an environmental problem can be an issue without disease at all. The only thing that doesn't really work, and in this train of thought, is what about that intersection between pathogen and environmental issue with no fish present? If you don't have fish present, you can't have an active disease. I can't really rectify that in this scenario, other than to say the area where the pathogen and the environment overlap is when you have a tank that's laying fallow. So you've had to remove the fish because of active disease. The pathogen is still in the tank. That's in the environment. And so that would be what that represents. So looking at this Venn diagram in a different light, I think you can understand that if you have no pathogens in the tank and no environmental issues at all, the fish will be fine. So on to my quarantine methods. Those that have been on Reef to Reef know I'm really into quarantine. I do extensive quarantines, and part of that is based on my public aquarium work. When you have, oh, I don't know, $75,000 worth of fish in a system, you got to be really careful when you add new fish. It would be a disaster for me to add, you know, $25 worth of green chromis to that system and bring in ick and risk all those thousands of dollars worth of fish. So I have very strict quarantine protocols that I follow. Remember, quarantine is not just to make your new fish healthy, it's to preserve the health of your existing fish. A lot of times you've got 10 times the value of fish in your display tank than you do with the new fish coming in. So you've got to protect those display fish so they don't get sick. And quarantine, even if you can't control the disease in quarantine and you lose fish, because everyone does lose fish in quarantine, they at least didn't get into your system. Now, this process does not stop every disease. It stops about 80% of the major issues. That last 20% are untreatable diseases that no one can really control. So my full quarantine period is about 60 days. You got the fish, though, in your tank. At least you can enjoy it. You can learn about it. You can get to observe it up close. I'd rather watch a flame angel in a quarantine tank than in a reef. You're going to see it more often anyhow. So it's not like you don't get to see the fish. It's still your fish. So don't be in a rush to throw them in the display. I only use observational quarantine for real sensitive species, like flashlight fish, some seahorses, sea dragons, things like that. Everything else I proactively treat. And what I use is CopperSafe. I've used it since, gosh, late 70s, early 80s. I'm familiar with it. It's like an old friend. I know its quirks. I know what it can do, what it can't do. So full CopperSafe for 30 days. I don't like to mix praziquantel and CopperSafe. It's done, but I just try to go one treatment at a time, not to complicate things. And so I'll do a freshwater dip during the CopperSafe quarantine, just if I think there's flukes, just to buy me a little bit of time. Then I treat praziquantel 3 times over 2 weeks, and then I observe for 14 days with no meds. Now, this quarantine method doesn't work real well for Neobenedinia flukes. Nothing does really, except this. Low salinity, half salinity for 35 days works for Neo. It also helps with ick. Doesn't help for velvet, but just to give you an idea, I've done a full quarantine and then added 35 days half salinity at the end to make sure, because if Neo gets into our systems, we're sunk, because we can't run half salinity on our main fish systems because we have elasmobranchs, sharks and rays, and they don't tolerate low salinity. I'm going to go through this rather quickly. There's a lot of diagnostic methods you can use. They all involve pretty much using a microscope. Just be understood that you cannot just look at fish sometimes and know what they're suffering from. You need to do skin scrapes or gill clips. Some veterinarians will even do gill clips on living fish. It's tricky. I've done it. You got to be very careful, but it's something you can do. But the idea is to do diagnostic dips or skin scrapes or gill clips to look for parasites. After a fish dies, sometimes you do a necropsy. With all the necropsies I've done over 40 years, I've only been able to determine cause of death in about half the cases. So a lot of times a necropsy, even for me, doesn't work. But if a fish is not fresh, like that clownfish in the lower left, don't even bother. That's going to be covered with protozoans, and you're not going to see what's a parasite and what's a decompositional protozoan. The mono on the lower right, that white stuff is all coelomic fat. And look at the liver in the little watch glass. It's like white and it floats in the water. That fish died from obesity, overfeeding. And then, you know, if you work with a lot of fish, keep records, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel or make the same mistakes over and over. These are just some photos of different parasites you might see. This is a Gyrodactylus Fluke. They're really small. When you hear people say, do a freshwater dip and then look in the container for flukes, the only fluke that you're going to see that way with the naked eye is Neobenedinia. And it looks like little sesame seeds. First time I saw it, I thought the fish's scales had fallen off into the container. I didn't know what I was looking at. All the other flukes, like these Gyrodactylus, are tiny, and they look like little balls of snot in the bottom of a dip. So without a microscope, you won't be able to use a dip to diagnose Gyrodactylus. The symptoms are always really vague, rapid breathing, cloudy eyes, and eroded fins. The thing with flukes is that they tend to come on slowly. So protozoan diseases tend to hit faster. And so if you have a disease where a fish is going on and getting worse gradually over a week or two, it's probably not a protozoan, it's probably a metazoan like a fluke. Here's some gill flukes, Dactylogyrus. These came from a spotted eagle ray. They were really big. You can definitely see these. These are like a ½ inch long. Here's Cryptocaryon, saltwater ick, marine ick. I treat mostly with copper. You can go hyposalinity, which would be a specific gravity of 1.009, where most fish tend to drop out at 1.008, and Cryptocaryon can sometimes hang on at 1.010. So you got a very fine line there for hypo with these guys. A lot of times people, they let ick percolate, they try to control it, they try to manage it. But if the spots go greater than about 20 or 30 on one side of the fish, it goes into geometric growth. The parasites the spots go like, you've seen it before. You get 1 or 2 spots, the spots drop off, then 3 or 4 spots come back, they drop off. Pretty soon the fish has a few spots all the time, but then at some point they start going from, 20 to 40 to 100 to 1,000, and then too numerous to count. So you need to, it's not a fast killer, but it will kill if you don't stay on top of it. So you don't dilly-dally and get a treatment started. Tang turbularians, black spot disease or black ick. I think there's 2 species involved here because one of them is self-limiting. The yellow tangs would come in from Hawaii. They'd get a few black spots like the one in the upper left there. The spots would go away during quarantine. Copper doesn't work with it, but and neither does Prosequantal doesn't really work well. But then there's another species, another type of black ick where the spots get more and more numerous and the fish can actually start reacting like they have flukes. They get tattered and look really bad and they can die from it. So I can't tell them apart by looking at the spots. You should clean the gravel. Hopefully it's a bare bottom quarantine tank. You can just siphon the bottom to remove any eggs. And formalin dips at 160 parts per million seems to work pretty well on these. The lower right is a freshwater black bar mylius. And I just want to explain, it looks like it has black spot disease. You can see those black spots, but that's actually a digenetic trematode, which I'll talk about. And it's not the same thing. The turbularian is over on the right, and that's not a very good picture, sorry. But you can see in the lower left of that picture, the 2 little black spots, those are its eyes. And that's how you can see those eyes in almost every case. And that's how I identify them. Bacterial infections. Most of the bacteria that infect marine fish are ubiquitous. They're already in your tank. They get started up because of some major stress or more likely an injury. There's something called Mycobacterium, fish tuberculosis, you probably heard about. You can isolate that from every aquarium if you look hard enough. It's hard to find. You have to use special sampling and media plates, and it takes like 60 days to culture, but it's fine. You can even find it in your frozen seafoods. So basically, it's not something that I usually use in my quarantine process prophylactically. I only would use antibiotics if I saw a specific bacterial disease. When you're looking at dip water or just using your microscope around your tank, you'll find lots of non-parasites. The most common one in the upper right are brine shrimp cysts and nuclei. People see these and think they've got some terrible parasite. The lower left one there is just a little baby mysid shrimp. And then the one in the lower right is an oddball. It's a freshwater worm, and it looks like anything like a leech. And you'll find them living on fish. You can do a skin scrape and pull these off of a freshwater fish. They're called Aleosomus worms, but they're not parasitic. They just hang out and they sometimes land on fish. And So sometimes things are not dangerous. The old adage is if you find something in your aquarium and it's not living on the fish, it's living in the gravel, it's probably not a parasite. Here's Neobenedinia. This is that fluke I was talking about. The upper picture is one that I've stained red, and then I squished it, and those things at the top are all its little pyramid-shaped eggs. It's really hard to break the life cycle of this. You'll hear people say, oh, that's a Prazi-resistant fluke. It's not that the fluke has developed a resistance to praziquantel. It's that they're egg layers, and it's really, really hard to break the life cycle. If just one egg, and prazi doesn't kill the eggs. All prazi does is knock the adult fluke senseless, and they drop off the fish. It doesn't even kill the flukes. But once a fluke is off the fish, they can't reattach. So they're done for. But it does nothing to the eggs. And the eggs can take anywhere from 5 to 14 days to hatch. And the larvae come out and reinfect the fish. They've done a study where it showed that just one egg successfully hatching could restart a new infection of Neobenedinia in an aquarium. I use hyposalinity to really knock this back. The other problem with praziquantel, real quick, I should mention, is that it gets degraded quickly by bacteria in your tank. The same types of bacteria that break down uneaten food. Problem with praziquantel is the certain type of bacteria that breaks it down sort of learns to do so. So the first time you dose with prazi, it lasts for 36 hours in your tank. The second time you dose, some of that bacteria has grown and it eats the prazi pretty quick. After 4 or 5 treatments of prazi, if you've done that, the bacteria is present that it eats the prazi so fast it doesn't even kill the flukes anymore. And that's another reason why people will talk about prazi-resistant flukes. So here are these digenetic trematodes. The deal with them, they're always internal or they're right under the skin, but they have to have at least one secondary host, sometimes a tertiary host, in order to complete their life cycle. So they're self-limiting in captivity. They're not going to grow in numbers because they don't have the proper bird or snail host that they need to complete their life cycle in your aquarium. Fungal diseases are really rare in marine fish. They're real common in freshwater, usually as a result of an injury. But here's a pyramid butterfly. That lesion at the top of its body there was actually an external fungus. Only 2 cases that I've seen in marine fish over the years. This responded really well to, 75 part per million formalin dips with aeration once a day for 3 days, maybe 5 days. And that fish actually recovered and that fin grew back. Lymphocystis is an odd one. It's a usually non-fatal viral disease. Back in the 70s, it was super common. Every rural grandma that came in was going to get lymphocystis, guaranteed. We saw it all over the place. I haven't seen lymphocystis in a public aquarium, in any public aquarium I've worked in for 30 years. But yet now I'm seeing it in home aquariums again. This is a regal angelfish that I worked with somebody on and had one of the worst cases I've ever seen. That fish made a complete recovery. And unless it involves the fish's mouth and it stops it from feeding, lymphocystis will go away on its own. Don't try to treat it. There's no medicines that will help. And removing the lesions, which are really just living cells that have become enlarged, just causes more damage and spreads the virus particles. Here's a chart that I've compiled over the years of prevalence of lymphocystis in marine fish. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see some highlights. Hamlets from the Caribbean are super prone to getting lymphocystis, as are royal grommas. I see it a lot on Moorish idols. You just don't see that many Moorish idols. And then I'm seeing it more on marine angelfish lately. Uranema is a big one. I've pretty much given up treating it. I know that a lot of people suggest treatments for it, but it's really difficult to treat because it's internal. It's an internal protozoan disease. That green chromis up there, that red band on its body, it looks like an injury or a bacterial infection, is uranema protozoans that have grown in the muscle tissue up to the skin. By the time you see that lesion, it's too late. The fish is dead, doesn't know it yet, but it's dead. They often die with their mouths open like that. And I can't explain why, because they don't really gasp before they die. But when they die, that mouth just pops open a lot of times. You see it primarily in newly acquired green chromis, yellow chorus wrasse, and amphias. Occasionally I'll see it in angelfish, sometimes butterfly fish, and then sometimes angelfish. There's probably 2 different forms of it, because we've had uronema in sea dragons, and that's external. We've also seen it in seahorses, and that's treatable with formalin. But this internal version is not treatable. You can't get the anti-protozoan drugs into the fish to knock the uronema back. A lot of times because you don't even know that the fish has the problem until the lesion breaks to the surface, and then it's too late. There's been a major uptick in this disease since 2020. I have a hypothesis that it's actually related to COVID in an indirect way. The COVID pandemic decimated a lot of fish collecting areas. Their supply chain got totally disrupted. Flights weren't going the way they wanted them to go. There weren't as many flights. And I don't know if you guys know, but these fish, when they're collected, they're put into plastic bags filled with oxygen, and they can spend like a week floating around in plastic bags, going from collector to consolidator to exporter. And they open the bags, they change some of the water, they add new oxygen, but they'll live in these bags. And apparently adding a few extra days to the whole process is too much, and uronema is really, really common. My recommendation is right now, be real careful about anthias when you buy them, and don't buy any green chromis or yellow chorus. The infection rate is just too high. I never liked green chromis anyways, because they've always been a little bit dicey. Unless you can get them from Fiji, where they're net collected and handled properly, but they're also 5 times as expensive. So there's uronema. It sucks. Luckily, it's not super contagious. Well, that's the other thing I should point out. You can isolate uronema from just about any mature aquarium. I found it almost every time I've looked for it. Some scientists that have done DNA studies say that the percentage of infection is more like 30% of aquariums have it. It's not going to infect your fish. Its normal diet is bacteria. I don't know how or why it gets inside fish like this. I don't think I've ever seen uronema in a fish that's post-quarantine. You always see it in freshly imported ones. Here's a drawing my son made for me of Amyludinium velvet. It's a lot rarer than people think. A lot of times, advanced cases of ick will be called velvet, and it's not. It's just bad case of ick. First and sometimes only symptom you will see is rapid breathing and hovering into the water flow. Sometimes in advanced cases, you can see a dust or a sheen on the fish. I use copper in a quick full dose. Peroxide dips at 75 parts per million for 30 minutes have bought some time. There's a study where they did that in Polydactylus fish in Hawaii, but those fish were moved to clean aquariums. So moving the fish back to your infected tank won't work. You have to move them to a new tank. Hyposalinity doesn't work for these guys. Here's Brooklanella, causes that white mucousy film on newly acquired clownfish, usually wild-caught clownfish, sometimes captive raised. Chloroquine's the best treatment for that. Some people use ruby reef. I've not used it, but it supposedly works. And then formalin dips or static formalin baths will also work. Copper does not work on this, neither does low salinity. This is just a picture of a scad that I had gotten from New York, Long Island, and there's an isopod that came out of its gill. I mean, that thing involved the entire gill of that fish. There's other diseases. There's lots of other viruses that we know nothing about. There's tumors like goiter, that old white fish in the lower right, that thing coming out of its, below its gills there is actually thyroid tissue. We see a lot of eye diseases, usually caused by trauma, like that Squamopinus anthias there with the air bubbles in its eye. If you're going to be doing fish medications, you need to be able to calculate your doses. And I don't know how many people know this. This is a real good formula. I've used it forever. A person at the Shed Aquarium taught me this. So basically, if you have a target dose of X parts per million and your tank holds Y gallons, you multiply X times Y and divide it by 266. And that will give you grams of medication to use. And since a milliliter of liquid weighs about a gram, you can also consider that a milliliter. So that's a really good formula to understand. Then for tank volume calculations in America, we do length times width times height in inches and divide by 231. That gives you gallons. if you want to do critical dosing, you measure the inside tank dimensions and then water depth to the top of the gravel, and then subtract about 15% for tank decorations. That'll give you an even more accurate volume. Head and lateral line erosion. This is something I've done a lot of work on, a lot of research. We were able to demonstrate, and so was the Disney organization, that soft activated carbon, lignite carbon, causes head and lateral line erosion almost immediately, like within 30 days in ocean surgeonfish and other tanks. Lots of cures abound. I won't go into all of them because there's literally dozens of cures that have been presented. I did a survey of public aquariums, and carbon came up as a cause known by public aquarists in about half the cases, and about 70% of the cures presented involved moving the fish to a new aquarium, either through part of the cure on purpose or just because that's how the cure was done. And that's how you get rid of these carbon fines, this carbon dust, is get the fish into a tank that has not had carbon. Carbon itself has a lot of different types. I'm not a chemist. I know that pelleted carbon was a lot less likely to cause severe head and lateral line erosion. It's that soft, dusty lignite carbon was really bad. The chevron tang on the left, I got a picture of that. That lesion was that size, never got any larger. The odd thing about that is it was perfect on the other side, kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde fish. Looking one way, it was perfect, and looking on the left side, you can see this. There's a little bit of dogma out there that you need to look at, maybe question a bit. I didn't find out about this until I got back onto Reef to Reef after I was on another forum back about 10, 12 years ago. And then I've not been active on any aquarium forums for a long period. When I came back in, I kept coming up with things I had never heard of. And that when I examined, they didn't really hold up to scrutiny. And I think people need to question them because they're being considered as dogma nowadays, and they're not necessarily accurate. So the 76-day fallow period to clear a tank of a cryptocharyon infection, that certainly works. 76 days will work every time. Does it need to be 76 days? And why 76 days? So I did the research into it. I looked at the studies, and it was published in a paper where the co-author was the editor of the journal it was published in. And I don't think you should even be able to do that. The original study was from a PhD thesis that I can't find. I think everyone is looking for a more reasonable fallow period. And if you can raise your tank to 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 to 60 days seems to be more reasonable. When fallow periods fail, it's almost always due to a breach of biosecurity. And if you dig into these cases where a fallow period failed, especially these shorter ones, and these people will say, oh, 45 days, it didn't work. My fish got ick. If you dig into it, you'll find all sorts of amazing things like, well, I ran fallow for 45 days, just like you told me. I threw some new corals in, but no, fallow has to be nothing added to the tank. No cleanup crew, no corals, because those can all act as fomites to carry disease into your tank. Or worse yet, they run a fallow period and then put non-quarantine fish in their tank and then say, well, wait, they got sick, so therefore 45 days doesn't work. Well, you didn't quarantine the fish. So think about fallow periods for what they are and how that 76-day period came about. Another thing that's gotten entrenched and way over extrapolated, ramp up your copper treatment slowly. I had one gentleman tell me that he was on schedule to raise his copper levels in his system due to active disease over 10 days, but the fish died on day 5 due to copper poisoning. And I'm sorry to laugh, but no, it died because the fish were sick and you took 5 days to get them into full copper. The history of this is back in the old days, back in the 80s and 90s, we used copper sulfate citric acid. That's a lot harsher. It's tricky to use and it's a lot harsher on fish. We found that if you raised citric acid copper solutions in one day, you would kill off a lot of your pygmy angels and some of the more delicate fish. Go 2 days and you'd be okay. So nowadays, no one except for some people in Europe even use that kind of copper formulation. They all use amine complexed coppers like Copper Safe, Copper Power, or cupramine. And unless you miscalculate your dose, you can raise those copper levels up in 24 hours without any problem. We talked about drip acclimation as a problem. Tank transfer method. Lots to break down there, but it really is a more theoretical process, and it works okay for ick in some cases, but it doesn't work for those egg-laying flukes at all. And it can, done properly, it's not too traumatic, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand how to properly handle their fish, and ammonia builds up in the transfer tanks, and the excessive handling causes problems. Then, once the fish is out of TTM, you know, it may only be 7 days, 8 days, 9 days. Is it done with quarantine? Do you put it in your display then? What about these other diseases? So I don't follow TTM because it's a shortcut that leaves you open to other diseases. Another big one is everyone uses RODI water and no aeration for their freshwater diagnostic dips. For 30 years, I use aerated tap water. In our area, the tap water has a pH of 8.1. So some places in the South, I hear it's pretty acidic. You have to buffer that then. But for us, 8.1, I draw it out of the tap at the proper temperature, I aerate it and go for it. It works fine. A little bit of chlorine doesn't hurt anything. If you really are concerned, put a little dechlor in. The idea behind aerating it, though, is to keep the fish moving so you can better judge whether or not it's handling the dip well, and also to help dislodge some of the parasites that the dip is supposed to knock off. Using black mollies as canaries in the coal mine, that only screens for cryptocarine. It doesn't really screen for anything else. It's kind of a cool little trick, but here's the problem. Mollies are oftentimes held by the breeders in Florida, the wholesalers, and sometimes even the pet stores. They're held in brackish water conditions. There are euryhaline flukes, that is to say, flukes that can handle freshwater, brackish water, and saltwater that can live in those systems, and you can carry those into your tank with black mollies. And there's also some suspected viral diseases. So I wouldn't mess with black mollies as a canary in the coal mine. And then finally, this is rampant. I don't understand it. People will say, well, I took Neoplex and I added it to Focus and I added that to my mysids and I fed it to my fish. And my question is, okay, so what was your dose? And there is no answer to that. It was some medication in some amount of food, which something was fed to the fish. And all fish medications are dosed on a milligram per kilogram of fish weight basis fed daily. So you need to really do the calculations. On Reef to Reef, we have some calculators and stuff that will actually do it. It's real complicated. I only do medicated food in real specific cases because it's so much work to do it right. So real quick, I know my time's running out here. I want to talk a little bit about aquarium ethics and sustainability, because that's really a vital subset of all our aquarium activities. You all know that legislation is geared to shut the aquarium industry down. It's not sustainable. We need to get on top of that. And I'd like to just give you a brief overview of this. I have actually a full lecture that I give on this to University of Michigan and Bowling Green State University. But basically, ethics is really a continuum between animal exploitation at one end and animal rights and non-use at the other end. And in the middle is us. We're concerned about animal welfare and well-regulated use of the animals. You've heard the Tang police, right? Now, I don't advocate for keeping fish in overly small aquariums, but the Tang police are a special set. There are no wrasse police. And I don't understand that, because most wrasse and parrotfish need a lot more swimming space than a Hapadas tang does. But in any event, a local researcher down at University of Toledo measured cortisol, the stress hormone, in wild and captive parrotfish. And he found that after 1 week of acclimation, there was no difference in cortisol levels between parrotfish housed in a 50-gallon tank or those housed in a 150-gallon tank. So three times the size, made no difference. He also found there was no difference in hormone levels between aquarium fish and those in the wild. And then I just want to, you've heard that old so many inches of fish per gallon capacity. that can't work. And you all probably know this by now, but 2 inches of fish per gallon or an inch of fish per gallon, whatever it is. The reason that won't work is that as the fish's length goes up linearly, its mass and its waste output goes up exponentially. So why I explain it to people, let's say you have a 10-gallon tank. You can put 12 1-inch neon tetras in that 10-gallon tank, but try to put one 12-inch Oscar in that tank. The inches of fish are equal, 12 and 12, but the Oscar is not going to work. So just be careful when you're looking at tank capacity. Also, another thing that throws me off all the time with tank size, I'm used to working with aquariums that are mostly open water swimming space. So you tell me you got a 100-gallon tank and I get a picture in my mind of basically a cube of water that holds 100 gallons, whereas a 100-gallon reef tank might be filled with 90% rock, right? I mean, in some cases. So you have to look at full swimming space and not just the size of the tank. I have a formula that I developed. I think it's on Reef to Reef. Yeah, it is. So you could look in the libraries there. But basically, all I do is I go on fishbase.org and I do 8/10 of the maximum adult size they list, because I found that's how big they get in captivity for the most part. I actually did a survey. Then you measure the open water space of your tank, length, width, and add those together. You don't really care about depth as long as it's greater than about a foot, and areas filled with corals and rock shouldn't be measured, and any water depth less than 12 inches also needs to be ignored. Then you have variable B. You create a ratio with those two numbers, B divided by A. If the value is less than 8, you really shouldn't keep that fish in its aquarium, because when it reaches its full adult size, it's going to be too small of a tank. If the number is greater than 10, the fish is probably going to be comfortable in that aquarium for its entire lifespan. Now, that is a single fish. It does not take into account if you have 20 fish in that same tank. So you got to use that formula with a little bit of discretion. And then sustainability, sustainable animal sourcing, avoiding those cyanide collected fish. Sustainable aquatic animal foods is also important. Brine shrimp eggs are really getting over harvested as a food for aquaculture. And if we run out of brine shrimp eggs, that's not sustainable. You should look at sustainable energy for life support systems. And then remember, lower mortality rate in your animals means less replacement. So if you can keep your fish alive twice as long because you're taking care of them better, your replacement schedule drops by that same amount. And just real quickly, we started up a new group on Reef to Reef. They're called Fish Medics. We have our full quarantine protocol posted there. And we really are trying to offer the best fish disease advice in the fastest way possible. Some of the medics that I brought on will answer your questions directly. Other ones tag me and ask follow-up questions. Like someone will say, my fish are sick. And some fish medic will go in and say, okay, fine, upload a video or something to keep the ball rolling, because time is of the essence with these. And then finally, I'm working on a book, Diseases of Aquarium Animals. It's at 300 pages, about 90,000 words, and it covers freshwater, saltwater, brackish water fish, and some invertebrates. Not a lot of coral disease, but some. The problem is there's no longer any sort of an aquarium book publishing market. You used to be able to sell your books to Tropical Fish Hobbyist or Barron's, and a couple other publishers. They've all stopped publishing books. Everything is electronic nowadays. So I've just been posting sections of it on Reef to Reef, and we're looking at possibly publishing it electronically through that media. And the end. So I got a question for you all. I put this slide up in a lot of my talks, and I asked my wife.
Jay, what is that?
I asked my wife the other day if she got it, and she did eventually. Those are just ends of animals, right? Okay. That's all I got. So let's see if I can stop sharing. There, okay. Back to the group.
I think that made sense.
Thank you.
I think Lisa's frozen.
I heard her briefly and then she dropped out. Oh, now she's off the queue now. I wonder if I have to stop. I think it shows me as being the host. I stopped sharing my screen, but I don't know if I need to relinquish the host. Let me look here. Well, while we're waiting for Lisa to log back on, does anyone have any questions?
So I have a question about quarantine tank. So I'm assuming if you buy a fish and then a couple of weeks later you buy another fish, you need a separate quarantine tank for all of them, like each time you buy a new one.
That's a real good question. What I do is that's a real good question. A lot of times I try to plan it so that doesn't happen, but if it is unavoidable, the quarantine counter just resets to day one when you add a new fish.
Okay,
just because, you know, so you don't need a second tank per se. It just depends on what works most economically for you. You can get fish through 14 days of copper and just extend it to 45 if you add new fish 2 weeks in. With Copper Safe and Copper Power, that's okay. I've kept fish 4 months or longer in Copper Safe with no problem at all. I can't speak to cupramine though for long term because I don't know.
Okay. I guess you could, if you know you're going to buy a bunch, you could buy as many as you can together. If you want to enter quarantine all together, is that another way to?
That's what we do in public aquariums. We bring in large shipments and run them through a quarantine. It's easier for us because then we have them all on the same treatment schedule. Even if there's multiple quarantine tanks, and the aquarist can go through and do doses and things all at the same time to all the tanks in that we call a quarantine cycle. That works out really well.
Is there any kind of guide to size of quarantine tank versus like, I don't know, I guess how big, you know, if you've got a 300-gallon aquarium, you're putting a bunch of fish in, but your quarantine tank's only like 40-gallon.
Yeah.
I guess it needs to be kind of probably bigger, unless there's only one fish in it.
Well, I can give you, I do know one thing. Well, I guess it doesn't really apply. I was going to say for the aquarium that I just recently retired from, 17% of our aquarium capacity in the building was quarantine space. But I don't know how that would translate to a home aquarium. One of the big problems that I see with home aquarists is that they set up quarantines as an afterthought, and they set them up using those, you know, supplements like the bacteria in a bottle to instantly cycle their tank. And I don't like to do that. I like to have a tank with a well-developed bacterial cycle to use as a quarantine tank. So what I'll do is I'll run sponge filters in sumps, in exhibits, you know, or display tanks, and have them, and just pull the sponge filter out and use it in a quarantine tank then when I need it, because it will be populated with a lot of beneficial bacteria. People do it though. They'll use that bacteria in a bottle, Fritzheim or Turbo Start, Dr. Tim's, and they'll add it, put the fish in the next day, and manage their ammonia that way. That scares me though.
Is the copper in the Parazoquil, does that not hurt the cycle, kill the bacteria?
No, copper knocks bacteria back maybe 20%, but if it's robust enough, you won't even notice it. Even hyposalinity, even dropping the salinity of your tank halfway doesn't really kill the bacteria. The bacteria do fine. It'll kill off invertebrates, you know, but the bacteria the beneficial bacteria, the nitrifiers, will thrive even at hyposalinity. There are some things that will wipe out your bacteria. Certain antibiotics will kill it. Chloroquine can cause some problems. So when you dose with chloroquine, you should monitor your ammonia. Even if you had an established quarantine tank, you should monitor your ammonia for a week afterwards.
It's a little harder to get a hold of nowadays.
Yeah, chloroquine got pulled from the market. Yeah, it went away in a hurry. There was a bunch of is it FDA? Yeah, FDA cease and desist orders. What happened was, this is a funny little side note. I had written an article on chloroquine for Advanced Aquarius magazine, and people were citing that on eBay when they were selling chloroquine for aquariums. Well, when COVID hit, people were going on eBay and buying that chloroquine and then referencing my article. And I was like, no, I actually got called by the media asking about chloroquine. And I said, no, I wrote this article 8 years before COVID. I had no idea that chloroquine was going to be used for this, and I have nothing to do with this. Please leave me alone.
So after you run a quarantine cycle, do you need to kind of reset, like do a full water change in preparation for whenever the next time, get all the, all the copper or any medication out of there and just totally
good point. I
redo it?
didn't mention that. I'll usually reduce the copper level by half before I go into the praziquantel phase. Just, you could remove it all if you wanted to, but that's expensive because it takes a lot of water changes or copper removing chemicals to do. But once the quarantine is done, I hear a lot of people say, oh, then I got to strip my quarantine tank and sterilize everything and start it up again. No, you don't really, because think about it. The fish that left your quarantine system, if they do have a disease, have carried it into your display tank anyways. It's there now. And if they didn't carry a disease in, that means your quarantine tank doesn't have a disease. There's no reason to sterilize a quarantine tank and start it over at the end of a quarantine cycle. We keep ours running. The only time you would want to take it down would be as if you know you're not going to be buying any fish for 6 months and you don't want to keep the quarantine tank running. Kind of like my hot tub during the summertime. We drain that sucker. We're not going to pay the electricity to run it all summer when we're not using it. So other than that, though, you can just let your quarantine tank cycle, throw a little bit of food in, or keep a fish in there just to keep things biologically active.
Well, that's good to know, because I'd always heard you had to strip it all down and sterilize it and stuff.
The only time I ever sterilize and strip a quarantine tank is when I had uncontrolled fish loss due to an unknown disease. I did have a case where we got in some fish from the Gulf of Mexico, and our veterinarians couldn't figure out why they were dying. We could not. Our quarantine process didn't stop it. They kept dying, and 6 months later, they're still dying, and we ended up euthanizing the remaining few fish, and I sterilized that tank because I didn't know what was going on. But if you had a successful quarantine conclusion, that is to say the fish are healthy and they got moved into your display, you don't need to sterilize that tank if you don't want to.
Okay.
What do you explain that bacteria that starts using up your praziquantel faster and faster? What do you suggest to break that cycle to get going? I own an aquarium store and we use copper and then hit prazi every time we get in some new fish, pretty much every couple of weeks and stuff like that. But yeah. What would you do to kind of hopefully break that cycle at least every once in a while? Or hey, what would you recommend as a universal quarantine or practice for stores?
Good question. To be honest, when I managed the pet stores back in the day, we just ran Copper Safe, which reduced cryptocarine, it reduced velvet, and we were good with that. We didn't do much with flukes back in the day. That's a real problem. And I should have explained. So our quarantine systems, when we hit them with prazi multiple times, we do end up having to break them down and sterilize them. I should have mentioned that because that prazi bacteria. So let me give you a case. We had a problem with flashlight fish with flukes, and we were medicating the tank with prazi, and we couldn't break the life cycle. And we were hitting them with prazi multiple times at higher and higher doses until we were hitting them with 10 part per million prazi doses and nothing was happening. And then it became evident. And that's when I read the paper that explained that there's this bacteria that grows, and we had to move the flashlight fish out, sterilize the tank, restart it. treat the flashlight fish in another tank. So here's an idea. Well, that probably wouldn't work for a retail store. Might work better for a wholesaler. You can use Prezi as a dip at 10 parts per million instead of, I don't know what you're using Prezi at. Do you use Praziquantel or Prezi Pro?
Praziquantel. We make it in. We use vodka or 180 proof vodka, and we do it over a milligram per 10 gallons. We start out at a milligram per 10 gallons, but sometimes depending on what's going on, we'll do a lot more than that. I mean, we've done double, triple, stuff like that. I mean, it seems to still do a lot of good, and we haven't had any cloudy eyes or ripped fins. And when we also do on request, freshwater dips, we use our tap water plus prime plus CChem alkalinity to get it to where it's safe to use on that.
Okay. The typical Praziquantel dose is 2.2 parts per million. So that's 2.2 milligrams per liter. So that's a lot higher than what you're dosing. And a dip, a couple hour dip with an aerator, and temperature control would be 10 parts per million Prazi. I'll tell you, using ethanol as a solvent for Prazi, you got to be careful to use the absolute least amount of ethanol needed, because you'll get bacteria blooms like 3 days later, and the whole tank will just turn white.
Oh yeah.
We had the ethanol.
We used to get bacteria blooms even with Prazi Pro. Their suspension stuff will turn your. I mean, well, we expect that. We just know that for 3 days after our we dose, we're gonna have white tanks, and we're okay with that. It's just a trade-off that we're like, hey, we're running this, boom, our tanks are white.
Here's another trick to try. Do you guys carry those real fine mesh brine shrimp nets, the ones for baby brine? They're about that big?
No.
It's not your regular fish net. You can use pantyhose, which you can't find pantyhose anymore either, probably. But these brine shrimp nets, you used to be able to buy them from Hagen or Penplex. And it's a real fine mesh. You put your Praziquantel powder in that, wearing gloves, and then you hold that in your tank, and you on the outside of the net, you squeeze it and rub it, and the Prazi comes through the net. And that's how I do it.
I've seen that done in video. I'll try. It's just amazing that it would actually work, because that stuff. I mean, mechanically, it's hard to break that. I get a little pistol and mortar and work that stuff into that vodka. Like it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
What was my other question? Fish that are known by you to be sensitive to copper, and what do you do to actually quarantine those fish to get them at a suitable space to put into a tank? Or do you just stay away from fish that are not sensitive to copper?
So copper sensitivity in fish is kind of an interesting thing. A lot of the fish that you hear about as being sensitive to copper aren't necessarily sensitive to copper. They're just sensitive to quarantine in general. They don't like being in quarantine. So you hear parrotfish. Oh, copper kills parrotfish. No, bear quarantine tanks kill parrotfish. They don't like it. Harlequin tusks. Copper will kill them in an instant. Well, they don't like sitting in a bear quarantine tank. They like to have a nice, stable environment. There are a few fish I don't hit with copper. Never use it on flashlight fish. I don't like to use it on seahorses, pipefish, or sea dragons. I don't like to use it on mandarins. With mandarins, I sometimes I just try to avoid them, but my aquarists always want me to order some in. And what I'll do with them is, we have coral propagation systems that have no fish in them and lots of pods and stuff. I'll put the mandarins in there for a month and just do an observational quarantine. But the reality is, clownfish, damsels, butterflies, angels, Moorish idols, I've run all those through copper with no problem. Some people say porcupine puffers don't like copper.
I've had trouble with some butterfly fish, but those are,
Now,
you know,
what kind of
difficult.
copper are you using?
Cupramine.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I have to be careful when I talk copper because cupramine is a little bit harsher, and I'm not as familiar with it. I don't use it.
Right. Yeah.
So when I
Oh,
say
copper question, do you believe that sand in a quarantine, what is your opinion on that? Does that take out your copper levels? I'm bare bottom, so I can keep my copper levels steady, but I don't know. I've never done sand, and I'm not sure if the myth of sand taking out your copper is a real myth, or the trade-off, because you can do the sand that helps the wrasses and stuff like that, but can you keep your, you know, copper levels constant?
what about using, it's hard to find, but I found it on Amazon, non-calcareous sand.
Like a silicate?
Yeah, it's like a silica sand. It's probably a granite. They sell it for freshwater aquariums.
Yeah.
Or if you can only get calcareous sand, put it in a little dish and put it in your bare tank. Let the wrasse burrow in that.
Pool filter sand is what people use a lot. It's silica based.
What is it?
Pool filter sand.
Okay, yeah. Number 3 filter sand is something that we've used before. The other thing is I can't tell you about cupramine.
Right.
Copper safe does not get absorbed by calcium very fast at all. Oh, and then the HANA checker works really well for these amine-based copper products.
Oh yeah. Okay, I was going to ask what you use to test copper safe.
Well,
So
I
those
use
HANA checkers.
Yeah, the HANA checker works really well. Apparently, there's 2 different types of HANA checkers: a high range and a low range. And I just learned this last week. The low range HANA checker is not approved for use in saltwater.
Oh.
Only the high range is.
That's great.
You go on their website and the high range says for fresh and saltwater use. And the low range doesn't say that. They don't come out and say it doesn't work in saltwater, but it's weird because it's the same chemical reactor. It's the bichromate test in both cases, but you need the high range anyhow to use for cupramine, copper safe, or copper power. One thing, as you probably know, never mix cupramine with any reducing agent like prime, dechlorinators, or formalin.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I don't do that. The one question I did actually come up with is that right now we're using prime. You started out with ammonia and its toxicity. Have you heard of using prime to detoxify the ammonia in your fish bag? That or reducing the ammonia. You talked about raising up your new water to more acidic to match it, but have you thought about detoxifying the ammonia in there so you can do a drip acclimation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. You can do that. I use Novaqua. But prime is the same type of process.
Okay, and probably in that small amount wouldn't. Well, most of it's not going in my display, but probably in that amount it wouldn't react to copper in my display.
No. So what happens is cupramine is copper bound with an amine, which is an ammonia product, a nitrogen compound. And when you add prime to a tank with cupramine in it, it breaks that bond and releases free copper. And free copper is real toxic to fish.
All right. Sorry I took up so much time. So
sorry.
Or break it down. Thank you. I appreciate it. I was hoping that you would be here, but I'm glad that we got some questions.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, if no one else has a question, I have another question. So if you did have a fish make it into your display system that had ick, let's say, you're gonna have to catch them all of them in there, get them out, so you can treat them because you've got corals and stuff in there. What about like cleanup crew, like invertebrates and stuff? Do those have to be caught too, or they stay in there and that's considered fallow if they're in there and no fish are in there for like 60 days? Or
right, they would the cleanup crew can stay in with the corals. They're considered laying fallow. They cannot propagate ick on their own. The ick parasite. So I didn't get into all the details of the life cycle. It's complicated even for me to try to walk through it. But basically, there's a stage called the Tomont stage. It's a resting stage. In areas of low oxygen and low temperature, that Tomont can remain active for a long period of time. But eventually, it has to release the tomites, the little swarmer stage. And if they don't find a fish host, then they die and it all dies out. So you want to ensure that all the algae, macroalgae, your cleanup crew, your corals, all lay fallow with no fish in the tank. And you don't have to worry about them moving them out.
Okay, cool, because that'd be hard to find them all.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that same kind of question. What about like, what's cross-contamination on invertebrates to bringing in your pathogens? What is a good coral quarantine to do it so you don't have any bugs, I mean, any parasites coming in on that?
That's tricky. I
Cleanup
generally,
crew or sorry, go ahead.
If I'm getting cleanup crew from a system that I know doesn't contain any fish, I'll give them a rinse in salt water and put them right in. If it's coming from a system where I don't know if it had fish or not, then I'll hold them in a fishless system for 30 days and call it good. Now, I understand there's a logic flaw there. 30 days isn't 45 days, and it certainly isn't 76 days. The problem is, as you're all aware, holding cleanup crew animals in a fishless holding tank without a lot of algae to eat and holding corals in a subpar system is also rough. So I really, I go 30 days and call it good. I know it's not a perfect system, but we'll get in 300 turbo snails, okay? And they're destined for a 2,000 gallon exhibit. I can't hold them for 76 days. They're going to starve to death in a tiny coral prop system. So what I'd love to see dealers do is have fish systems and have invertebrate systems and not mix, but I know what the tendency is. Oh, I got this little neon goby. He's so tiny. He's not going to live in my fish system. I'm just going to put it in my coral system, but then you've brought in a potential risk then for anyone who buys coral out of that system. How big is the risk? It's not real big. If there's not active disease in the invertebrate system, and it's just, I don't think it's that big a risk, but it is a small risk.
What do you feel about UV sterilization? I like that if you use UV sterilization coming out of the bottom of the tank, the theory of the nematodes dropping off going into the system would be great, and I've seen it very effective. It seems like that way. If it's coming out of the sump, I haven't seen it as effective. But if it's actually drawing from the bottom of the tank and having a lot more flow, I've seen it more effective. But what do you feel about UV sterilizers battling pathogens or parasites?
Yeah, that's a big question. Lots to break down there. I will tell you that that Ed Noga, Stephen Spotty, all the major aquarium people of the 90s and earlier, they've all demonstrated that UV sterilizers are really, really effective at removing pathogens when it's what's called slug flow. You have a tank, it goes through a UV sterilizer to a second tank. That stops disease. As long as the bulb is sized correctly and the flow rate is right and you replace the bulbs frequently enough, that is almost 100% effective at removing disease in that second tank. But when you have UV on a side stream, any sort of a side stream, there's something called dwell time. And the parasite in the aquarium can sometimes persist and never get exposed to the UV. So everyone says, well, it has to drop off the fish and then the UV will take it out. Well, it does about 95% of them, but it doesn't catch every termite. some of the termites can be stuck on the fish's skin and in their gills. It's not such a, it's a messy system. It's not cut and dry like, you know, the termites live for 3 days and then they all die. And, you know, it's not as regimented as that. It's real sloppy. And so I found that UV sterilizers, oh, and then UVs don't do anything for metazoans, multi-celled animals. They're just not strong enough. They won't do anything for flukes. They won't do anything for fluke eggs. So you still have to deal with that. What I found is that they help reduce the incident of free-floating bacteria, and they're pretty good at velvet controlling velvet. And they'll help limit ick, but they don't always stop a serious ick infestation. So at the last aquarium I worked at, we used UV sterilizers in only 3 tanks. Public touch tanks, because we felt we needed to limit bacteria, because we didn't want someone putting their hand in the tank, getting an infection, and then suing us. And then we used UV sterilizers on our jelly exhibits, because jellies are really prone to bacterial skin infections of the belt. We don't use UV on our fish systems, not even quarantine. But that's personal opinion. Lots more to it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been super, super informative and helpful having you be here to answer questions.
Jay, we are so excited that you're here. I've got feedback, sorry. And I want to do a shout out for the Big Little Fish Store. That's where we are this evening. Woohoo!
Was my mic still on?
Whoops.
It's okay. We have some echo. It'll help if I take those out of my ears. And so, Jay, we are so pleased to have you. We do need to let the store people go home. So thank you, everyone. If you have questions for Jay, you'll be able to locate him on Reef to Reef. And thank you, everyone, so very much. Have a great night. I'm not going to repeat the announcements. Anyone who's watching this on YouTube, the announcements were covered at the beginning. That there is so a few seats left on the bus. If you'd like to sign up, it's in the forum of the website. Go to events and then go to bus, and you'll find it there. I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop. You sure you want to stop?